Welcome to the first webinar of the UNEG Use of Evaluation Working Group in 2026, which is titled Beyond Quality, Influencing Evaluation Use in UN Organizations. My name is Patrick Durst, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I work as an Evaluation Capacity Development Specialist at the UNFPA Independent Evaluation Office and serve as one of the co-leads of Workstream 1 on good practices of evaluation use within the UNEG Use of Evaluation Working Group. Strengthening the use of evaluation has long been a key pillar of UNEG's work. Within UNEG, the Use of Evaluation Working Group aims to better understand and enable evaluation uptake. We focus on identifying replicable practices that ensure relevance and utility of evaluations across the UN system. For more details on the activities of the working group, please refer to the information that will be posted in the chat. Over the last 2 decades, the UN has made significant strides in improving evaluation quality, with UNEG playing a crucial role by establishing evaluation norms and standards and issuing guidelines. However, as directors of evaluation units across the UN system acknowledge, these evaluations remain considerably underutilized by both UN organizations and member states. This gap between evaluation quality and evaluation use raises important questions. Why do well-designed evaluations fail to inform decision-making? What factors help us ensure that evaluation findings are taken up by decision makers? And what role can evaluation managers play in enhancing evaluation use? Today, we are pleased to welcome Simon Lawry White from Wine Management Consulting, who will explore these questions and share insights into the often hidden drivers of evaluation use. This webinar will propose practical ways to strengthen evaluation use, emphasizing the role of evaluation managers as organizational learning partners who facilitate use by understanding organizational context, cultivating trust, and navigating power dynamics while upholding independence. As you listen to the presentation, I encourage you to think about concrete ways to enhance evaluation use in your own organization and join the question and answer session with questions or reflections. We'll also post a few housekeeping rules in the chat for your reference. Please take a moment to review them to ensure a smooth webinar. With that, let's turn to today's presentation. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, Simon Lawry White, who brings a wealth of experience in evaluation. Over the past 30 years, Simon has managed and conducted more than 100 evaluations and management reviews. He is a management consultant, mediator, and facilitator. Previously, he served as evaluation advisors at the UNICEF Evaluation Office. As part of UNEG, he originated the Evaluation Practice Exchange seminars, which many of us know as an important space for peer learning and professional exchange. Beyond evaluation, Simon has held leadership roles across humanitarian and development system. This breadth of experience gives him a particular sharp perspective on how organizations function and how evaluation can effectively influence them. Simon, we very much look forward to your insights. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for your introduction. Hello, everybody who's online. Today, I want to cover a few areas of evaluation management, which are not discussed as much as I think they should be. This is drawing on a one-day training, and I'm just going to stop. I'll highlight a few points as we go along. So one of the slides might represent a 45-minute discussion elsewhere in the workshop, but we're just going to have a brief dip into some of the subjects, and I'll bring some personal examples from my experience to illustrate the points. I believe the principles I'm going to discuss with you can be used at any level of evaluation, but I'd be interested in your responses to whether you think that's true. Next slide, please. So we have two principal functions in evaluation management. One is the areas that we control, and others areas where we influence. And unfortunately, we also have areas which we don't control at all, and they're outside our ability to do anything about. Sometimes things just happen, and evaluations don't always succeed because of factors we can't control. So we shouldn't expect to get 100% success but I think we can do much better than we do. Next, please. So I know that all the UN evaluation budgets are probably being cut right now. We still spend an enormous amount of funding on staff and projects for evaluation, and we're still wasting quite a lot of that resource. We don't know how much, because we don't actually systematically try to find out how much we're wasting. However, we have made progress in norm standards, policy, evaluation capacity, and in evaluation quality on the control side. And on the influence side, evaluation now has a much higher status than it used to have in the UN system generally. And we've got much better at stakeholder engagement and communication. Next, please. So this is just a very quick reminder. Sorry if you are already completely aware of this, but for our conversation, just remember the difference between utility, which is evaluation that is potentially useful. In other words, to generate a quality evaluation which managers can use if they choose to, versus utilization or just simply use, which is evaluations which are used and bring positive change. Next, please. So I've got part of a quote here from a 2019 piece of research on the politics of evaluation in international organizations. Utilization is complex and multifaceted. So the two blue boxes at the bottom, quality and engagement, I've already said a little bit about, but in the rest of the presentation, I want to talk much more about psychology, dynamics, and the context of the organization. I am a bit concerned that some evaluators don't seem to see the yellow boxes actually as part of their job. But I'd like to convince you that understanding and working with these areas is an important part of our role. Next, please. So how is evaluation seen in your organization? We spend a lot of time and money on improving the evaluation function, the policy procedures, having significant enough budgets and a more professional approach. And that was all necessary. The last 20 years, we've been building those building blocks. And as a result, we're doing much better quality work overall than we used to. But I want to emphasize the right-hand side here. What's the perception of the evaluation function? Is it seen as something significant? Does it carry weight in your organization? What kind of reputation does it have? What kind of stories do managers tell each other about evaluation and whether it's a helpful thing or not? My key point here is that it is the perception of evaluation that drives the level of engagement of the management and their teams in evaluation. And it is the level of engagement which itself drives the level of use of the evaluation. Next, please. So here I've represented our what I called influencing and control in a different way. So at the bottom in yellow, we have managing in. This is all what I call managing in, which is the standard evaluation processes of recruiting consultants and collecting data and doing analysis and reporting and so on. On the top half of the diagram, however, is what I want to talk about, what I'm talking about today, which is managing out, how to engage the client and the organization. And there are some very important sort of points in the middle, which are called starting and ending, because the evaluation starts and ends with the client. The quality of engagement then makes all the difference. So managing out needs more attention because it is key to whether the evaluation makes an impact. And managing out needs listening, facilitation skills, and understanding of the client's business at a relatively good level. Next, please. So our goal is to implant the evaluation in the organization. And I've just used two little pictures here to illustrate this. We want the evaluation to connect or to be implanted with those who are being evaluated and those who influence the take-up of the evaluation. So on the left-hand side, you can imagine it as the prongs of the jigsaw piece that we need to connect into the rest of the organization. Or in the case of the river flowing down, here is our little evaluation represented by a log, which we want to float down the middle of the river and not to be left going round and round in an eddy on the side of the river. Just to give one little example here, years ago, I was managing an evaluation of gender policy, and the evaluation wasn't really very good. The report wasn't good, and we were rather struggling with it. And then the board of the organization decided that they needed to review what they were doing on gender. Suddenly, the evaluation became the latest, most current, and only independent piece of assessment available to them. And they swallowed the report whole and made a lot of use of it. So that's a good picture, a good example, not through anything that I did, just because of events. The events I was talking about at the beginning that we can't predict made it become very useful for the organization. Next, please. Okay, so we need to identify who the client is and who are the key stakeholders from the outset. These are not the stakeholders who provide the information that allows you to assess the performance of whatever it is you're evaluating. These are the people who make a difference in deciding what happens to the evaluation once it's over. So we've got one person in the middle here who we'll call the main client, and then we've got other people around who influence the outcome and influence whether the evaluation is used. That these people might be in many different locations in an international organization. We want to do three things. We want to understand who wants the evaluation to happen and why do they want it to happen. Understand who has the power to implement or resist change, and identify and include the key actors who will influence the outcome. This is from the beginning of the process, not late in the process when you decide that you need to start communicating the results. It's my experience that organizations sometimes struggle to identify who the client is. They don't have any particular person who seems to be responsible, which is a red light. That's a flashing red light for me, because what we want is to know who is the person who is going to be responsible for the results at the end. So here we're already into some of our organizational politics in understanding who wants what conclusion, because everybody might think they want a certain conclusion from the evaluation, or they want the evaluation to go a certain direction. So here we're starting to understand who are the interests of the various actors. Next, please. So let's look at that in more detail. Here's our client up on the left-hand corner here. And this is just a picture of what she and every other manager is doing in their job. They're required to make some sort of difference. They've got money and people to make a difference. And of course, being the UN, since reputation is so important, they want to be seen to make a difference also. They are living with a sets of expectations on them and requirements, and evaluation might be one of those requirements. They see various opportunities in their work, and they are managing risks and threats to their programs or to their team or to their budget. And what we need to do is to understand sufficiently about her business that we know what her incentives are, and we connect the evaluation to her incentives. Of course, you can't understand everything about their job. You need to understand enough. And I would argue that the key to evaluation use lies in this diagram and lies in the client's incentives and how well you manage to connect to them. Next, please. So it's important to establish evaluation ownership from the beginning, before the evaluation starts. Now, who should we put as the client? Who will you accept as the evaluation manager as being the client? You should designate, in my view, the client as the most senior person that it's practicable to work with. There's no point shooting for the stars and then having somebody who never shows up to any meeting or never reads any papers. But the client should be at least one level above the manager of the evaluand. So if you're evaluating a health program, the client should be the manager of the health program, not the manager of the health program, in order to ensure accountability and follow through. The client needs to be personally invested psychologically in the results of the evaluation. To give an example where I didn't understand any of these dynamics, oh no, sorry, that's a different example. Let's stick with this one. With an evaluation of human resource management, it was, I agreed that the deputy executive director of the organization would be the client because the director of HR was the main person representing the evaluand. And at the end, we wanted it to be sitting under the leadership of the deputy executive director to whom they were responsible. Next slide, please. Now, building client trust is absolutely key. And for you as evaluators or the evaluation manager to be credible with them, you need to be able to answer these questions, the questions that they're effectively going to ask you. They may not ask you these questions, but that's what's happening in their heads. Do you know what you are doing? So you can establish your credibility by having read up on the subject, by having the ability to explain, and it's a great opportunity to educate the client on how evaluation works, because many of them will not know. And by that process, you help to build your credibility. Do you understand what we do? That's educating yourself. Are you listening to what we need? So here you should be asking questions of them to understand what they want. Not that you're going to be controlled by what they want, but you need to know what they want. Are you coming across to them to be as a fair and balanced person who is likely to produce an impartial result at the end? And do you care about their business and what happens to it? If you can successfully answer all these questions, you're going to strongly build your credibility with them and lower their blood pressure and increase their trust in the process. And a lot of this happens at the preparation stage. I would say that when I say balanced and fair, in my experience, it needs to be 80% good news and 20% bad news. That's really about the maximum that people can tolerate. You have to be able to get them to swallow the medicine, and 20% bad news is generally the maximum in my view. Next, please. Now, some of you will have seen, you may even have issued the kind of chart here on the left-hand side where you're assessing evaluation quality and you've got some sort of scoring system. Perhaps you've sent it out to some outside consultants to check the report. I've both issued these tables and received these tables, and I find them annoying. I find them annoying to receive for just the simple reason that sometimes you don't like what the comments are, but also because I've started to realize as time went on that they don't tell us whether the evaluation is going to be used or not. Next, please. So quality improves utility by removing reasons for non-use. So the better the report is, the fewer reasons there are to reject it. That by itself doesn't drive use. So quality does not drive evaluation use. Quality is a necessary but not sufficient condition for use. And the drivers of use are outside the evaluation process largely. And referring back to that earlier slide about the client and their incentives, that to me is where use lies. I did an evaluation for the Red Cross some years ago, and I turn up in a room with 100 people in it, And as soon as I sit down for my presentation, one of the most senior managers stands up and says, "There's nothing wrong with this evaluation, apart from the methodology, the findings, and the conclusions." In other words, he was trying to completely rubbish it. And then when I left the room, he pulled me on one side and said, I didn't mean any of that. I just had to say it. So I walked into the room completely having not informed myself about the politics and the incentives and the push me pull you that was going on around the edges, the managing out part of the evaluation. I've smartened up these days. I'm pleased to say I was a young and somewhat naive evaluator in those days. Next slide, please. Okay, independence. Now this is an important question, which I think is a very sort of current topic of conversation, probably in the UN right now. When I started in evaluation, independence lay 100% with the external evaluators and their report. A lot's changed since then, and we now have big agencies like WFP, UNDP, and so on, who have an independent evaluation director, and independence is vested in the director, not in the consultants, and the consultants are, in effect, consultants to the director. So that gives a big structural advantage in the organization, but many of us and many organizations don't have that structure and rely on evaluation staff and consultants to, in effect, project independence, to make the evaluation appear as independent as possible, or more probably, in this case, the most impartial that we can manage. So how does that affect how do we handle this? Well, what the client wants to know, most of all, is the evaluation fair? Do they think it's fair? Do they think it's valid? And therefore quality does matter. But it's a mistake to think that because you don't have a solidly independent function, that you have to somehow keep it, the client at arm's length. In fact, I would say in this situation, engagement with the client is even more important, because the client engagement is what will hopefully provide the momentum that carries you forward, even when the formal structures cannot oblige the managers to respond to an independent evaluation director. Next, please. Okay, so just as I said, we're sort of dotting down on a few different points here. Who owns which parts of the evaluation? Well, findings and conclusions are fully with the evaluation team while listening to stakeholders. Recommendations, we realized, need to go through a somewhat different process. We need to draw on the best of what the evaluators can give us and the best of what the management and staff can give us in order to co-develop recommendations. Sometimes I think it's quite unfair to expect consultants to come up with good evaluations, good recommendations, sorry. I mean, how many of them have managed large international organizations and know what works within the management of these, of our agencies? Not many, in my experience. So working together with management is a good idea, and it doesn't mean that we always agree, and the pen is still held by the evaluators even at the end of the process. Next, please. I'm going to skip over that point. Next, please. So what are the success criteria for recommendations? Well, we have our, what I would call hard factors, which are the ones that are in the foreground, the ones that we understand. The recommendations must be evidence-based. They must be able to bring the desired change if implemented, and they must be realistic. In other words, as a group, if you assemble them all together, they must add up to a group of recommendations that can actually be implemented. But behind the scenes, and again here with our understanding now of the political say, the soft factors in the background, we need to understand, well, what's the level of consensus around these recommendations? What's the level of credibility around the recommendations? And can they be solved by the client? Because as soon as you finish your report, the client then has to be able to sell the recommendations to everybody else around them. Now, those three, consensus, credibility, saleable by the client, they're never going to appear in the report, but they are in the back of your head, and you have to have some understanding of how far the evaluation recommendations are going to progress. And as we'll see, you may have to take action if you don't have a high level of confidence. Next slide, please. So now we've got to the last stages of the evaluation, and we have a few challenges here. This, what I call the docking stage, is incredibly important, because this is where the baby, i.e. the evaluation, is adopted by the management. And this is where a lot of value can be gained or lost. There are two problems here. One is, first of all, everyone's just tired at this point. Everybody wants to finish the evaluation and get on to the next thing. We have a big problem in finishing evaluations on time, and the client gets fed up sometimes waiting with all our faffing about and processes of dotting I's and crossing T's before we finish the report. But there is a chance of fatigue, of people dropping out at this stage, and it's something to watch out for. Next, please. Sorry, I should have asked you to press the button. Yes. So at this point, the client is taking leadership of the results, and the evaluation manager is sort of stepping back and shifting their role to communication. So all I wanted to say here is, don't wait for the management response. You need to feel that the client has got hold of the results and is ready to do something with them by the time you are in the draft recommendation, revised recommendation stage. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to finish on this one. Management response, and I have to be very quick, so I'm running out of time. You might receive, let's say you have an evaluation with 10 recommendations, you send off the report, you get a management response back, let's say in a month's time, and these are the sort of responses that you're getting in 3 different scenarios. I would be unhappy with the first one, because there's just too much agree. It's just too easy. Seems too easy. They agree with everything. The second one looks a bit dangerous to me. I would say that we've had not enough consultation in here, perhaps. There's too much disagreement. And I'm more comfortable with number 3, because what we recommend, often you'll find the management is saying, well, the finding behind this recommendation is good, but we don't necessarily agree with the recommendation, so we're going to do something else instead. And you may have a recommendation that's never going to be accepted. I did an evaluation in an African country. The first recommendation was incredibly important. They said, we're never going to do this, so don't put it in the report. I put it in the report anyway. They ignored it. So what was the right answer there? I'm not sure there is a right answer. Just to finish on a positive note, I did another presentation in Geneva, evaluation of the relationship between 2 of the big UN agencies, very high level meeting. Everybody sat through the presentation looking very happy and smiling. And I discovered later that they'd already met the night before and they decided what to do, and they were just listening to me out of politeness. So just goes to show, if you get the engagement right early on, the management may just grasp it if they've got the incentive and run with it and kind of leave you behind, which is what you want. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for listening, and here's my email if anybody wants to get in touch or is interested in the full-blown workshop on this subject. And Patrick, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. Your presentation is a clear reminder, I think, that evaluation influence is less about producing excellent reports, but more about understanding evaluation stakeholders, cultivating trust, as well as strategically communicating evaluation results, essentially. So the key takeaway for me is really that evaluation is not only a technical, but also a highly political exercise. Thank you for sharing these insights. And I would now like to open the floor for questions and reactions. Please feel free to raise your hand virtually or type your question into the chat. We've already received some questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to ensure all questions are addressed within the remaining time of this webinar. So unless I see any hands that are already up now, okay, there's one participant, Judith, who has her hand up. So I'll give the floor to her. And I will take some questions in a cluster, like 3 to 5, and then hand it over to Simon. So we'll progress in that way, and then also get back to the questions that are already in the chat. So Judith, over to you.
Thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I fully agree with everything you said. I'm a social psychologist by background, and I'm always amazed how much psychology plays into evaluation and how neglected it is. So I think your session really speaks to that. My question was actually in the chat, and I wondered, I mean, I understand the neuroscience behind communication and, you know, positive, negative news. But a very simple question: what if there is actually more than 20% negative news to share? I mean, would you still suggest that you are selective in what you communicate, and that it's always more positive news than negative, or what would be your advice on that? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take some other questions as well, Simon, and then I'll give the floor to you. Let me see who else had the hand up among the participants. We had some more hands raised. We had Rana Singh, who has actually 2 hands up. So I'll give the floor over to you.
Yeah. Good evening. Thank you very much, Simon, for the informative presentation. And we have in fact conducted an evaluation with Simon, so we know the Bhutan evaluation, and I represent WHO. My question is more kind of just to know the experience. With your experience, how much we can use now AI for evaluations in the future? Because that's more and more coming, and that's enough and more information is available. Is it the way forward? I just want to ask this question. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm just checking if there are other hands up. I don't see any at the moment, so maybe we'll start with those 2 questions, Simon, and then we can move to the questions that are in the chat and have another round of questions that people may ask verbally now. So Simon, over to you.
Well, thanks very much. Yes, what if there's more than 20% bad news? Good question. I think I would just say, I mean, rather than trying to draw exact percentages, to make the absolute best of the good things that are happening, the positive initiative that's been taken, or the commitments that people have made, or whatever you can find. Again, as a psychologist, you understand this better than me. Whatever positive strokes you can give, help the medicine to go down when you describe the negative aspects. And when you come to the conclusions, try to think of the things that matter the most in terms of what's not working. If you can think of a few things that would unlock the situation such that many of the other problems would be addressed, then try to focus on them. Because if the things are going badly, the client may already know they're going badly. They may feel bad about the fact they're going badly, or they may be in denial. You don't know. Yeah, I would say if you're in seriously negative territory, maximize the positive and be selective and focused about the negative. I see a comment in the chat about we have lack of concrete evidence about underutilization. I think you are right insofar as we have a lack of systematic documentation of whether evaluations are underutilized. I think we have a grand array of anecdotal evidence of underutilization, but I agree, it's not an exact science, and we should have done more research and should do more research on this in the future. And I'd also like to suggest that we should do more research on how do we tell if an evaluation is going to be used before it's too late and we find out that we've missed the target. I would like to see, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the kind of tick box exercise on, have all the right criteria been used and so forth. That's all fine. But I'd like to see much more effort put into, including perhaps by this task group itself, on being able to assess whether evaluations are in a fit state somewhere in the middle of the process to be used in the end. Can we use AI? Yes, we can certainly use AI, but I'm very cautious about how to use it. I do, if there's a vast amount of documentation to be assessed, and sometimes there is, I find AI useful for summarizing the key messages in those documents and sort of bringing the key points out of the background material. However, I have tried once to use AI to produce the first draft of an evaluation report. I wasn't very happy. I was not very happy with the result, and probably spent almost as much time correcting it as I would have done if I'd written it in the first place. I mean, evaluation reports have to deal with a lot of subtleties. They have to be couched and written in a very careful way. So far, I don't find that AI is doing that. And if it gets better in 3-5 years' time, well, perhaps we might think again, but I'm not trusting it for anything very important at the moment. Over.
Great. Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you for already addressing one of the questions in the chat. We have some other questions in the chat. I will group them a little bit. They are related to the interdependence or relationship between, I would say, the independence or collaborative and participatory approaches and the utility and utilization of the evaluation. We had one participant asking what your thoughts on the use of hybrid evaluation models are, where a UN staff member is the team leader who works with a team of external consultants, and how this impacts independence as well as the use of the evaluation products. And two related questions, which are covering issues related to co-creation processes for recommendation formulation. So referring to the example of the management response that you shared toward the end of your presentation. If you have many recommendations that are partially or fully disagreed in the management response, but you developed those recommendations through a collaborative process. So how would that be possible? Yeah, that you nevertheless have these disagreements despite this collaborative process. And in a similar vein, if you have fully co-developed the recommendations, then you should actually likely wind up with scenario one that you showed, where all the recommendations are being accepted. And how has your experience been with using collaborative approaches and then the extent of acceptance of the recommendation? So interesting points that were raised here that I will pass on to you, and then we'll go on to the next set of questions.
Yes, excellent. Excellent points. Thank you very much. If you have a staff team leader, if you have a team leader who's an evaluation staff member in the organization supported by external consultants, then you don't have an independent evaluation ipso facto, because independence is about the position of the people making the decisions about what the evaluation report says. And if that's an internal person, then they're not independent of the organization. Now, just to give you an anecdote on that, when I was in UNICEF when the very first UNDAC UN and DAC peer review was done, and at that time we had an evaluation director, but the evaluation director was sort of lost somewhere down in the hierarchy of the organization and not really in an independent position. So, and the report came out, I remember saying that the evaluation function was functionally independent, is what they called it. In other words, we behaved as if we were independent, even though we weren't. And that was basically because we had a very, forceful evaluation director who managed to get their views across, even though they were not highly placed in the structure. I think then you're not, if you're the staff members leading the evaluation, you're not going to be able to fully tick the box that says it's independent. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier, which is that the more the client buys into what the evaluation is saying, the more momentum you might create for the evaluation, even if you can't paint the evaluation as something that's fully independent. It depends, I guess, also on the procedures of the organization. If the managers are still required to produce a management response, which itself is somehow co-created, or the recommendations at least are co-created, and the management response is something that the organization takes seriously, then you are still using the evaluation function as a form of accountability, which can still be effective, if not fully independent. Yes, I like sorry, going on to the next comment, I like this one. If you have worked through all the recommendations and you've agreed everything together, and then why wouldn't you see agree in the management response? That is possible. I mean, it could certainly happen. But what I said, maybe I didn't have time to explain the point fully, is that the evaluators are still holding the pen. And if you may well find that you've got 8 recommendations that everyone's happy with, and a couple of recommendations the managers don't really like. And just because they don't like them doesn't mean you should not include them. And they may still come back with a disagree or a partially agree, because again, I've just emphasized the point. What's the key part of the evaluation that the evaluators are providing? The key part they're providing is the findings. That's your number one value added, is the findings. What is the assessment of the evaluand? That's where you're trying to be as impartial, independent, objective, evidence-based, etc., as possible. The recommendations are, if they're co-created, then they're not fully independent, but you're still holding the pen. And if you think that the recommendation is required on something the managers don't want to know about, you may still need to include it. Maybe then they will say, okay, we understand the finding behind this, but we think the solution is something completely different, in which case there'll be a partial agree and a different solution offered by them. I hope that partially answers your question.
Thank you, Simon. I'll go on with some of the questions that we have received in the chat, and thank you for the active engagement of all the participants. There is a question about the tension between accountability and learning in evaluations. Do you believe that evaluations always have this dual purpose with, reporting, reflecting maybe more or trying to show more a positive side towards external stakeholders, the kind of like 80% good news, whereas internal learning purposes, you might be able to enhance that percentage a little bit because you can be more candid and straightforward about some of the areas for improvement. And then a question that I personally like very much for all of you who are economists or have a background in psychology, to what extent do actually, the biases of decision makers influence evaluation use? Even though we might have good evidence and sound recommendations, they might not be used because the decision makers could have weak capacity to translate findings into clear action. They might be prejudiced, or they might face contextual or political constraints that hinder them from implementing the recommendations, although they're evidence-based and even co-created. And then we have two similar questions related about incentivizing the use of evaluation. So what practical tips could you give to participants on how evaluation managers can incentivize the use of evaluations among stakeholders? Are there any particular methods that you could share with the participants that seems to be of strong interest? And lastly, there's also another question on the measurement of evaluation use, which is linked to a previous question we had, and how we could strengthen the measurement of evaluation use as such. I'll leave it to that. There's a few more questions that have come in, but we'll take them in a next iteration.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, more great points. Yes, I mean, the nature of this presentation was that I was trying to hit on the particular areas of evaluation use. And I think an earlier comment was already pointing out that we can't just be completely utilitarian about implementation of recommendations. Evaluations kind of float off into the organization. Sometimes they come around again and get used in other ways that you don't anticipate and you don't know anything about. 5 years later, somebody does a synthesis of evaluations to inform something else, and that then plugs into some powerful piece of work which brings change in the organization. These are all unknowns and things that we cannot predict. Do I believe that therefore evaluations for accountability and for learning? Yes, I would say they always are, although the balance is often different depending on the type of evaluation. Is it a forward-looking or backward-looking? What's the balance between that? Is the evaluation being done because something's been totally messed up and we need to find out why? There's a different balance between accountability and learning in everything. As to the sort of candid internal learning, yeah, I know that some of the candid internal learning never turns up in the report, and can be captured in internal presentations and discussions. I think that's a good way to go. And yes, of course, there are limitations. I mean, recommendations. Consultants love to make recommendations for which there's no budget to implement them, which is one of the problems I was saying before about why would consultants know what good recommendations are. So yes, the problem is that it's not necessarily the problem with the weak capacity to implement, it's the weak capacity of us to come up with the recommendations that fit the situation that the managers are living in. As to prejudices, this goes back to my point about the psychology, and it also connects to the other question about incentivizing use. So to repeat the sort of main point of my presentation, we're not incentivizing use when the evaluation is over. We're incentivizing use before the evaluation starts by understanding the incentives being a summary word for all the other processes going on underneath that I illustrated in that I had in that diagram about all the things managers have to cope with. You've got to plug in to what we want to do as far as possible is to plug into their incentive so that we are not trying to kind of persuade them into something when the evaluation's all over. It's too late by then. You need to get them at the beginning to understand what they need, what they want out of the evaluation, give them as much as fits with an objective assessment, as give them the ammunition they need to make the changes that they need to make. They're not always going to like everything. They're going to reject some of it. They're going to be told by some other senior manager, forget that, we're not doing that because that's a threat to me. If we had more time on that diagram about risks and opportunities and obligations and so forth, I would say try to bring as much to bear as you can from the outset on the opportunities. What opportunities will the evaluation give the management? Try to move them away from the risk and threat view of the evaluation to opportunity, and try to move them away from the obligation, oh, well, we have to do this, but let's just get through this as quickly as possible. Try to move those discussions into the box, which is about how can we make this into a win for us, even if some of the news is bad. Measurement of use. Yeah, very, very, very hard. I mean, if you take use as the sort of big envelope of all the ways that it might be influencing, including by informing other processes that had nothing to do with the evaluation originally, that's hard to do. But I think we could get ahead of the story and figure out whether an evaluation was going to be used in the first place. Over.
Thank you for these reflections also on measuring evaluation use. I would just like to mention here that the working group has also been working on a set of indicators that are currently piloted in a few UN organizations to measure evaluation use better. And there's an example that a colleague from UNITAR, Kotinka, posted as well about how they measure evaluation use through the evaluation process. And there's a related question for you, Simon, about your experiences related to evaluation influence throughout the evaluation process. So not the instrumental kind of application of the evaluation findings, but more through the participatory process as people come to realize where things went wrong and what could be done better. So what is your experience with process use, and what could evaluation managers do to support this? And then we also have a question from a colleague in UNICEF about the trade-off between quality and influence, pointing out that there's several examples of evaluations that have not reached good quality assessments as part of the external system that is used, although they have made significant changes. And yeah, how to deal with that trade-off. I think that's a nice way to kind of like wrap up this webinar as well. And then we have Eloisa, who has her hand up and would like to directly ask a question. So I'll give her that opportunity, as this seems to be the last question that is currently pending. So Eloisa, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Good. I would like to build on what you just said about the incentives, and really building on the incentives of the different clients. And okay, we understand that we have this dual purpose. Now we have the high level client strategic ones, and then the operational ones. But given the context of scarce resources and shrinking of resources that are coming our way, and the fact that we really have to strip the value of evaluation, how do you see the role of the old tools such as cost-benefit analysis and just value for money to speak into the power? Do we have to go back to that? Do we have to reinforce that to have it very clear in our executive summaries? This is the value that this evaluation is having, or the value that this project is having, so that we are giving that information to decision makers that now are also them struggling to understand where is it and what to prioritize. Is this something that you are seeing? I know it's a little bit kind of going back to the 80s, but is it a tool that we should all be looking at again and maybe modernizing it or looking at this in a different way? I don't know. Sorry, it's a little bit of it's a dry tool, but at the same time, I think it speaks very clearly. Should we start looking at that again?
Thank you, Eloisa. I think that's a good question. So I think we'll address these questions and then we'll end this webinar unless there's any other burning questions from the participants. And as Simon mentioned, he will also be available for any questions that you might have after the webinar. We also share his contact details. So Simon, over to you to address this last set of questions, please.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think in general terms, I was already trying to address the incentivizing point. I mean, there are some sort of practical things. One is if you can evaluate at a turning point. For example, a senior manager is on their way out and another senior manager is on their way in for the evaluand. That's a great time to do an evaluation. Why? Because the new person, it's not their fault, whatever happened, the new person. So whatever the negative findings are, it's not their problem. And it gives them like a fresh sheet to fresh canvas to paint on. So but that sometimes just happens by accident. You know, sometimes you don't know that that's going to happen in advance. So there are some sort of key moments that you can choose. But I would say making the evaluation as unthreatening as possible. You can't make an evaluation completely non-threatening because it's going to be a public document. People are going to read about the performance of whatever it is that's being evaluated. And no, I mean, you can't bring the threat level down to zero, but you can work through the process with the stakeholders to kind of harness the most positive benefit out of it as you go along, while not pretending to them that if there's bad news, then bad news is going to come out. But I think if you give them opportunities to find ways out and show a positive way forward, you can get over quite a lot of that. I don't think I understood 100% the question about the trade-off between quality and what was the question again, Patrick? Trade-off between quality and
use, essentially. So that tension, you know, your key argument that quality actually is a necessary but not sufficient condition.
So I mean, I don't want to go backwards on our attention to quality. I mean, you could argue that some of the UN organizations have gone kind of a bit over the top in terms of the proceduralization of quality management, but in general, the movement towards quality has been excellent and a very important step. What I think we have been sleepwalking into thinking that quality evaluations are evaluations that will be used. So I don't see that there really is a trade-off as such. I'm not suggesting a reduction in quality. I'm just trying to counter the over-reliance on quality, because we at least in my experience, we have somehow under the surface or subconsciously assigned quality as a way to reach used evaluations, and I think that's a false perception. I'm sorry, my answers are very brief. A lot of these questions we could have, at least an hour, and in a workshop we would have at least an hour to discuss each one. So I'm sorry, you probably feel some of the answers are not satisfactory, and they're not satisfactory because they're too brief. Cost-benefit analysis and value for money. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I don't see them as a, it really depends on the subject, but if you've got the data and you've got the budget to do the analysis, go for it. Absolutely. I mean, we shouldn't ignore cost-benefit analysis because it's somehow passé. I wouldn't agree with that. And of course, we largely a lot of our evaluations are effectively relying on the perceptions of a wide range of stakeholders about what they think happened, because we often don't have the data to actually know what happened. I mean, if the tightly managed, contained, say, health program or agriculture program, we might be able to pin down the causality level to a believable point to make the right associations. But otherwise, we are still left greatly with perceptions and survey results and so forth, which are not, are not hard data. If we can have the hard data as well, that's great. Over.
Thank you so much, Simon. Despite the brevity, I know that this is, the format of this webinar is a little bit limited, but I think you shared very useful insights, and that also led to a very rich and constructive discussion. So I would like to extend a big thank you to you, Simon, for presenting today, as well as to all the participants who actively participated in the discussion on how UN evaluations can influence use in our organizations. Before we close, we also would like to kindly ask you to complete the one-question feedback poll that was posted in the chat. Your feedback is invaluable to us because it will help us improve future webinars. We'll also share a link to a speaker sign-up form that should now be available in the chat, and we'll also send it to you after the webinar. Should you be interested in sharing your experiences or insights in an upcoming webinar, we would love to hear from you. And with that, I would like to conclude this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinars. Have a wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.